Hi, good day. I am Dr. Melissa Neptune-Figaro, and today we're going to talk about transnational organized crime, but specifically we're going to look at the drug-crime relationship and drug trafficking, because this is an essential crime type when talking about transnational organized crimes. So specifically, we have four key learning outcomes for this session. So at the end of this session, you should be able to do these four things. The first thing is explain the relationship between crime and drugs, so drugs and crime. The second thing would be to identify the three risk factors associated with drug use and criminal behavior. To further explain that, we're going to take a deeper look into what we call the tripartite conceptual model. And this model actually looks at the relationship between drugs and violence. And the last thing we're going to look at is the global picture, where we're going to identify three key facts about drug trafficking in the Caribbean and Latin American countries. So when we start to talk about the drug-crime relationship, I think people usually have the perception, or the general public, or anyone who actually reads or talks about crime or converses about crime thinks that's a very simple relationship, that drugs causes crime. And this is actually a very complex relationship and not necessarily true. The link between drugs and crime is a very complex and dynamic phenomenon. And the reason that is because there are so many other factors. We cannot determine which is the cause and which is the effect. Does drugs cause crime, or does crime cause drugs? This is a very complex relationship because there are so many endless possibilities and so many conclusions to be drawn. So when looking at the drug-crime relationship, we have to take into consideration other factors than just drugs causing crime. We have to also look at the living condition of the individuals and what causes the onset of drugs. Does crime cause the onset of drugs, or does drugs cause the onset of crime? So to explain this relationship further, I'm going to talk to you about specifically the drug-related offenses, meaning drugs, the use of drugs causing crime. And we're going to take a look at the three key categories under which drug falls under. The first one is drug-defined offenses. Now, drug-defined offenses looks at crimes committed through the sale and possession of illegal substances. The second would be drug-related offenses. So this is persons who are actually drug abusers and the effects of drugs, and they're motivated to get for continued use of drugs to feed their addiction or the abuse of the drug. So this will be that they are motivated by money so that they can continue the use of these drugs. The third category would be the drug using lifestyle. And this is when drugs is actually associated with the use of drugs, and when persons are either under the influence of drugs or they're actually using illegal substances. So here's a little activity that I'd like you to do. Take a look at these three pictures and determine which one is the drug-defined offense, which one is the drug-related offense, and which one is the drug-using lifestyle offense. So if you decide to state that the drug-defined offense is actually number 3, you are absolutely correct. So you can see in this picture the person has a kilo of cocaine, and clearly it's not for just personal consumption, and it is actually an illegal substance. So this person may have been arrested for the sale or for the purpose of using illegal drugs. The second would be if you selected for drug-related offenses number 1, you would see that someone is trying to steal money, and the suggestion or the proposition would be that this person is trying to steal money because they are motivated by the need for continued drug use. So they are actually using money to buy drugs. And if you selected number 2 for drug using offenses, you're absolutely correct, because these are crimes that are associated with the use of drugs. And as you can see in this picture, you see a syringe which suggests heroin or some methamphetamine, but you also see pills, and that could probably suggest LSD or ecstasy. And this is using drugs. So the tripartite model is a conceptual model that seeks to explain this in a more systematic way, and it's a framework that was established by Paul Goldstein. And the first thing that this model looks at is the psychopharmacological violence. And this model of drug use and violence contends that some individuals, due to either short-term or long-term use of certain drugs, may become more excitable, irritable, or even irrational. And this may lead to violent behavior. And the relevant drugs that this model actually includes would be, for example, alcohol, heroin, cocaine, LSD, and ecstasy. The second explanation in this model is that of economically compulsive violence. And this model maintains that some substance users engage in violent crimes such as robbery to support their drug use. So heroin and cocaine are very expensive drugs and they are often associated with compulsive use. These substances are very germane within this model. And the last part of this model, the framework, is the systematic violence. And the systematic violence, the aggressive behavior associated with the system of drug distribution and drug use. So violence is associated with the marketing of illicit drugs, such as robberies of drug dealers, elimination of persons who don't pay drug debts, the mere fact that you have assaults and homicides committed within actually dealing drugs. So this model, and especially systematic violence, plays into the larger picture of what we consider drug trafficking. So now we're going to talk about drug trafficking in the Caribbean and Latin American countries. So for example, we're going to start talking about what exactly is drug trafficking. It is global, so this is why it's under transnational crimes. And it is illicit trade involving cultivation, manufacture, and distribution and sale of substances which are subject to drug prohibition laws. So one of the key facts that we're going to look at is the mere understanding that the drugs, especially illegal drugs, has the highest value in the market. So as you can see in the diagram presented here, you see an estimated $222 billion spent on drugs and drug sales in the market. And this is because the highest value is understandable. Unlike human beings or human trafficking, firearms and diamonds, the drug supply is consumed each year and is in need of continuous renewal. And the second fact is that the Caribbean and Latin American countries are viewed as primary threats to particularly the United States and European countries, because these territories are actually the main producers, that is the Latin American territories, are the main producers of drugs. They are able to produce drugs because they have coca bush, which produces cocaine, and they also have opioids or opiates, which actually are the main substance used in heroin. And the traffickers of popular illicit drugs actually come from the Caribbean and other Latin American countries. And they traffic cocaine, marijuana, and these opiates and methamphetamine to other countries throughout the world, specifically the United States and Europe. So this is why they are actually one of the highest security threats when it comes to illegal drugs. The last thing we're going to look at is the trafficking pathways. And this is really interesting because one of the reasons why drugs has been such a global and transnational crime is because it's manufactured within these Latin American countries, such as Colombia, Cuba, Mexico, but they're also transported to other countries as suggested on this map, and they are actually transported outside of these Latin American countries to Caribbean countries, and then they are transported to other countries that are the biggest consumers of drugs, which is Europe, West Africa, North America, South Africa, and Asia. And this is the end of this lecture. So let's have a quick recap of what was actually provided today. The information suggests that drug use and criminal activity are interconnected. The relationship is very much complex, quite complex. And there are particularly factors to consider when examining the drug-crime relationship and how it affects drug trafficking globally. So if you have any concerns, these are some of the resources provided that will be helpful to address any of your questions when it comes to drug trafficking. And if you have any questions, here's my contact information. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your evening.